Good afternoon and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week, I invite an expert from the world of business to share their knowledge, insights, and tips to help you with your business challenges. If there's a topic you would like covered, or if you feel you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie, and perhaps we'll be having a chat here one day soon. And today I have a very special guest who is an international best-selling author. She's a psychotherapist and she's a member of the Professional Speaking Association. I'm delighted to welcome Madeleine Black to You and Your Business studio. Hi, Madeleine.
Hi, Alec. How you doing?
This is going to be a slightly different interview, and our audience will find out very quickly why. As you know, I'm sort of going to take it from the last year in school, but tell me about that. Where were you heading? Were you into the workforce? Were you studious? What was going on in your life?
I was studious, but my last year of school changed because I experienced a huge trauma at just 13, and my focus for studying went because I was traumatized. And at that point, I was unable to tell people what had happened to me. So I didn't come out with many qualifications. I think I have an art and maybe an English O level, and that was really about it.
Right. In terms of this um, awful situation you found yourself in, would you like to share some of this with our audience? I know there's a reason I can ask this, so perhaps you might put some context around it and why it's so important.
I was 13. I was on a night out with a friend and we'd bought alcohol. We stayed at her mum's empty flat, and two young men from our table where we were drinking took us home, and they both proceeded to rape and torture me for about a 4 to 5 hour period. Um, it was something that I felt I couldn't speak about because they threatened me at the very end and told me if I spoke about it that they would find me. And I believed them, so I didn't speak about it till a good 3, 4 years later. But you know, what's inside us, what we don't speak about, is got to come out somehow. So my school was the last thing on my mind because my body just went into shock, I guess, and my mind as well, just trying to get through every day.
I mean, how do you take on something like that? I mean, it's something that started out quite innocent, and I'm sure there's plenty of our listeners out there at that sort of age who should be drinking, but they did, and off they went out in a night. Um, my goodness me, and how do you cope with something like that?
Well, I don't know if I really did cope at that point because it impacted on me in a huge way. I became depressed. I had anorexia. I ended up trying to take my life. I was sectioned in a children's psychiatric ward for about 6 months and just had fears, phobias, anxieties, and I still couldn't speak about it. Even being in hospital for 6 months, they just thought I was a troubled adolescent with an eating disorder. So yeah, it's I wouldn't really say I did cope with it at all. I didn't. It was just part of me. The trauma just took over, really.
Right. I mean, there must have been. You think the sort of warning signs are out there that either from parents or school teachers and that they see somebody just virtually change overnight, that they don't go into it further, try and find out what's happened.
Well, you would like to think so, really, wouldn't you? I wrote my story many years later, and I asked for my hospital notes, which somebody said I could do because I exactly for that reason. I wanted to
Yeah.
see, was it written down in my notes somewhere that she'd had a huge trauma or the suspected or anything? Nothing in there. They just really focused on how I was behaving rather than asking me, what had happened to you. So I'm hoping, this was the late 1970s, I'm hoping that things have changed and we are more, as we call it, trauma informed, that we recognize, the signs of trauma, and there's something clearly, obviously wrong with someone who couldn't speak, couldn't eat, hated herself. Yeah, let's hope things have improved for people out there, young people especially.
Yeah, I mean, what we have is people treating you for the symptoms you're exhibiting without looking for the root cause.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my mum was very ill at the time and she was bedridden. My dad was looking after the five of us. So I think they put two and two together and made five. I had been
Right.
in hospital earlier when I was 11 and I'd had an epileptic fit. And in hospital, they asked me the question, do I think my mum's going to die? And then I had another fit in hospital. So I
Right.
think they picked up where they left off because my mum's situation hadn't improved. And so I think they thought, it was because of the pressure at home, but it obviously was nothing to do. Maybe that was all mixed in there as well, but it was nothing to do with the pressure at home.
Yes, I can see what you're saying there, that they presumed and interpreted sort of the behavior related to something completely unrelated.
I would call it lazy medicine and assuming rather than presuming. They made a huge assumption, which was clearly very wrong in my case.
In terms of that particular night with your friend, how did your friend cope with it, or what happened to your friend?
Yeah, we both really decided not to speak about it because we thought we'd get into trouble because we'd bought alcohol. Her mum was away and we used her mum's empty flat to go back to. We'd met boys. So I think both of us were terrified of not speaking about it. And so we didn't really, I just went back to school, pretending like nothing had happened, and she did. And it's interesting, since I've left school and I've been in contact with other friends as well, she's the only person that I've never found on social media. I don't know what maybe her name has changed now, her married name, I don't know, but I've never been able to find her. So I don't know, after school, what happened to her? What went
I
on?
mean, from a school point of view, did you see similar issues coming up in her life and her behavior?
I don't think I was able to really be aware of that at that age. I
Right.
think I just put on the mask, and I was really rebelling hard. So I was partying a lot and doing a lot of drugs and drinking. So if anybody looked at me, they just thought I was a normal kind of teenager going out there, having a really good time and who'd forgotten about her studies. So I was very good at masking it all and pretending and not speaking about it. So yeah, it would be hard for me to know if she had similar stuff going on.
It must have been interesting from your classmates who would have known you as a particular type of person. I'm presuming now that possibly your good friends that would have been living what we call a clean life suddenly saw a different person going off to be a rebel and
Yeah, but then we all were partying. We were all drinking and doing drugs. I wasn't alone
right.
doing that by myself. So they were also part of that journey as well, which was normal part of teenager, isn't it? Exploring and pushing the boundaries and challenging people and being grumpy with your parents. That's you could put it down to that as well. So yeah, it was hard. It was hard for my parents. They knew. My mum now tells me that she knew something was up, but they didn't know quite what was up. So it was hard to reach out to me because I mean that my family nicknamed me the Ice Maiden because I literally stopped speaking to them. I
All
didn't
right.
feel at all. My head and body were totally disconnected. So it's I can't put any blame on them. They were doing the best that they could do um, with someone that looked like they were just rebelling in life.
The sort of shock aspect of it and your reaction to that awful night, when did you sort of summon up the courage to speak out about it?
Yeah, well, I wrote a little note on my pillow. So I was about 16, 17, and I told my parents that way. But speaking out, do you mean as in publicly or
No,
speaking?
even that, if we just take that particular example, so you felt that you had something triggered you to at that stage to write something.
What it did, I had snuck in very early one morning, late one night, and my mum is just really angry with me and she's waiting up for me, which she didn't ever used to really do. And she's got me by the shoulders and having a go at me, telling me that I was putting myself into danger and anything could happen. And I was still trying to scream out the words, but I couldn't find them. So I thought, they don't even know. The worst thing has already happened, and they're telling me that this could happen. So I just
Right.
wrote this note, and that's when they called my friend the next day, and she didn't back my story up. She said it hadn't happened like I'd said it had, and that often, that scenario played in my head over and over again. Why would she not support me? Why would she say it was different to how I experienced it? She didn't come out of it as attacked, I suppose is the only word I could use. She
Sure.
was put into another room, and it's interesting, a lot of readers will give me their own opinions of why that was, but I will never know. But I used to ask myself, well, why couldn't she? And I just think, she was also scared of getting into trouble, and maybe her guilt, I was the one that was raped and she wasn't. So
Right.
who knows what happened.
There must have been a real sense of betrayal.
Yeah,
I suppose.
absolutely. That's it exactly. I felt so betrayed by her and so confused as well.
And there was never any explanation given. Did you sort of the two of you part ways while you were at school? I mean, together, but was it a case of you just weren't going to be talking to each other?
Friendly, but we were all part of a big group. But yeah, obviously it wasn't. It was tricky after that. It wasn't quite the same.
And this was all certainly long before social media. I can only
Thank
wonder.
goodness. Yeah.
So tell me more about this. This was going to now influence your life considerably.
Yep,
Um,
so I left school then at 16 with not many qualifications, and I went to the Middle East for a year. I went to Israel because my parents wanted me to get away from the bad crowd that I was involved with. And I lived on a kibbutz for 6 months, which was brilliant. And then I lived in a town called Ashkelon, and I could just push it away from my head and just had the best time out there. Nobody knew me. But it was there nearly 40 years ago that I met my husband, and that changed a lot for me, really.
and if you're just joining us now, you're listening to me, Alec, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Madeleine Black. Okay, obviously that did you some good out in the kibbutz in Israel, and obviously meeting your partner for life. Then after that, how did you sort of manage that whole narrative with him?
Yeah, he always knew that something had happened, and before I said yes to him when he asked me to marry him, I just had to remind him that I didn't want to become a mum, because the way that I approached fears in those days was just avoid what scared me. That was to me, that was the simplest answer. And I had a real fear of giving birth, which I know is quite a normal response for a woman after she's been raped. I just thought it would be like being raped again, basically,
Yeah,
around the bed, and I'd be out of control. And I just thought, okay, I just won't do it. But I flipped that decision, thankfully, when I thought about if I didn't become a mum, they've won. I'm letting them control my life, and they actually don't even know that they're controlling my life. So I have three gorgeous girls. I do think they're gorgeous. I'm not at all biased, but that really did send me on a path of healing. And it's a bit like an onion, healing. We
sure.
pick off that tough outer layer, and we're okay for a bit, and then there's another layer. So then we have to work another layer, and a year or two can go by, and then there's another layer. So it's always been about peeling back the layers and doing deeper and deeper work till I finally get to the core, I guess, of me, who was me before it all happened. So
Sure.
anyone that's listening, I haven't got to this place overnight. It's been a lot of years of talking therapy, body therapies, learning to be centered and grounded and not being affected by when I get triggered. It takes a lot of work to really work that trauma out of your system, because it does take over. It disconnects you from your mind, your body. It disconnects you from just connecting into yourself and
Sure.
who you really are. So it's been a big journey of healing. But now, if anything, I feel like I have post-traumatic growth. I think I've grown
Post-traumatic
through what
growth.
I've gone through, and which is why now I'm able to help other people. So I really am passionate about speaking out to help end the shame, the stigma, and the
Sure.
silence around sexual violence, but also to help other people find their courage and their voice so that they can go and get help and heal their life. Because I really think that when we don't speak out, it weighs us down. It's really heavy, and we drag that around, and that heaviness affects every aspect of our life. So it's so much lighter not
Yes.
being impacted by, trauma anymore in my life.
Looking back on that journey, would you be able to pick maybe two or three defining moments in that journey that, if you knew earlier on, could that have helped you, or did you have to go through the whole,
Well,
healing
yes.
process?
I don't like to have regret, but I
Yeah.
do think if I could have got out of my own way, then I would have been
Oh,
an awful,
right.
would have been a lot cheaper. I would have saved years. But then it's never about the destination, is it? It's always about the journey, because
Sure.
eventually obviously becoming a mum and coming up with that plan, my best revenge, to live my best life, was a massive turning point. But
Yeah.
Anna turned 13, and lots of memories that I had just locked deep down inside of me returned. They came back, and I didn't want to believe them, because I thought it was, I know now it was my shame speaking to me. I thought if anybody knew what I saw, they would disregard me completely. They would look at me, in a very different way, and I just thought it was a reflection of me in some way. Now I know it wasn't. It
Yeah.
was the shame speaking to me. But yeah, if I could go back, I'd have to go back to when I was 13 and tell that young girl it was never her fault, because I always felt guilty and
Right.
ashamed and scared. But yeah, the journey is the journey. I can't undo the way that I did it. And you do it with the tools that you have at that time and with the people that are in your life. So it's a bit of a paradox, really, that question, isn't it, for me? Because I can't undo how I did my journey. This is how I did it. But I don't want to have regrets either. I don't want to say, I should have done this and I should have done that,
No,
because that's not what happened.
no. Um, but from your experience, I know you're out there on the international circuit talking about this story and helping other women. What things are you saying to them to help them with their journey?
Yeah, you know what? It was interesting because it was somebody else speaking out. When I heard them share their story, I thought, I could do that. And actually, she had written a book, and I had gone to see her in Glasgow, where I live. And inside, she had written in the book that she signed for me, "Now you must speak." And
Right.
I could do that. So it was really somebody else's courage that I got their courage, because courage is contagious. If somebody
Yeah.
sees
Hmm.
someone on stage speaking and they look in a really good place and they look really confident and they've had the most awful history or trauma, someone else in the audience is feeling that. It's not just women, men as well. Then
Sure.
maybe I can get to that place one day, and I want to offer hope to people, because I love that hope stands for hold on, pain ends. And it's
Mm.
true, we don't stay in the one frame of mind or the one emotion the whole time. Everything moves, everything changes. And I just want to show people that it is really possible to move through our trauma. So really, that's kind of, I lead by example, I suppose.
Yes, and I mean, it led you to write a book about this, which has been a bestseller. Again, tell our listeners the name of the book and how that helped as part of the healing process.
Yeah, initially it was suggested to me by a teacher that I've gone to for many, many years, that I should write my story down. And initially I thought, not a chance. There's no way I'm letting you read it or anyone else read it. And it literally took me 4 years to write 12 pages. And then he used my story at one of his workshops, and I was mortified. I thought, all these people know my darkest secret. But actually, standing in that shame also helped me to dissolve the shame, if that makes sense. It then, the
Right.
power that the shame had over me, it just diluted. And so I saw, I don't get rid of shame by running away from it. I've got to really head on face the things that actually cause me to run and cause the shame. So I was listening to this woman who said, "Now you must speak." And at that night, I just thought, well, I could write my story down. And I thought, I'll just write it down for me. And a bit like when my teacher, Ian Maho, said to me, "Write your story down." After 4 years, one night, the words literally came out. So I always really say, it's not very nice, but I always feel like I vomited my book. Because once I made that decision, literally in about 8 weeks, I had written 70, 80,000 words. And I was like the little red shoes, that couldn't stop dancing. My fingers just could not stop typing. I would see all the titles at night and all the words flying around. And I'd sit here at this Mac and just start writing. And yeah, the book was born in just a couple of months.
And if you're joining us now, you're listening to me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Madeleine Black. Just talking about that book, as it poured out of you, there must have been a sense of relief and the emotions that came out of it.
Yeah, as I say, initially I just wrote it for me, but then I saw that it's a book, and I was very lucky. I applied to about 25 publishers. I got about 24 rejections, but just in about 3 months, I then got a contract, which I know now from all my writer friends that that's quite unusual. But yeah, it has been very liberating. It's very scary as well to put yourself out there to start
Yeah.
with. But then I really saw what it could do, how it could help people. And I don't hold back in my book as well, which was interesting because they had a big discussion. There's one chapter called All of One Night, which, as it suggests, goes into all of the detail.
Right.
I don't think we should put all those details in. And initially, I didn't want to as well. But my editor had read the 12 pages that I'd written for my teacher. He was a friend of mine that went to the workshops, and he said, "You need to put that in." And I said, "Not a chance," because,
Right.
I'm still so ashamed. And he said, no, as a man, it's really helped me to see what can take place and the impact of the violence against a woman and what it does to you and your mind and your body. And so by the time my publisher said, no, it can't go in, I said, well, then I won't publish the book. I said, oh, it has to go in. So I was so definite that I wanted all the details in because I don't want to brush it under the carpet. I don't want to
No.
make it easy to digest because, it's then what's the point of making it easy for people to read? So it is uncomfortable in places, but no spoilers. They don't kill me. It does end well.
Yeah, and there must have been sort of again a lot of sort of mulling over how sanitized a version we make of this, and like what you were saying, the editor was saying, no, this needs to be raw. It needs to be authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, so they decided that they would put my chapter in, and I had been very lucky. I'd just been interviewed by Sir Trevor MacDonald, and he'd asked me some very pertinent questions. And they had a freelance editor, and she also backed me up. She said, because of the way that you speak, and you don't hold back really when you speak, it's important that the details go in. So they then put a trigger warning on that chapter, which I'm not sure if I agree with or not
Yeah.
because I think, well, I was 13, I never got a trigger warning with life,
No.
I just walked into this situation, but that's what they've done. And I kind of think, well, if you pick up a book and it's about a woman that's been raped, surely it's going to get mentioned in there somewhere in the book. It's kind of a bit obvious just by reading the front and the back cover, but that's what they decided to do. So there is a trigger warning for that chapter, but most people I know just felt they say to me that they wanted to read it for my 13-year-old self. They wanted to see exactly what took place. And actually, a lot of people have told me similar stories to what I.
Yes, and this is what's come on, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Something ironic sort of crossed my mind there. You mentioned you have three daughters. My goodness, you didn't get three sons; you got three daughters.
Absolutely. Thank you,
That
Alex.
presents a real challenge for you.
It did. It did. I was paranoid, obviously. I'm also a Jewish mama, so that increases your paranoia feelings. That the same thing would happen to them, and I very quickly saw that I could poison my daughter's minds. I could fill them
Sure.
with fear. So I had to really learn to let go, which wasn't easy. And I wanted them to be independent, fierce, strong women. So you have to be very careful what you ask for because I have got that, which is not so great at times. But yeah, I saw I could corrupt their minds, and I didn't want to do that. So yeah, they all know what they want out of life. They're good.
How did they handle the story when they sort of reached an age of probably more understanding?
When they were little, I always told them that I was just hurt very badly by two boys. Two boys tried to kill me and they hurt me very badly. So they were aware of that. And as they've got older, I've always made them aware of consent, of sexual relationships, of, respect in a relationship. They might not want to hear it, but I've always made them very aware. And when I published my book, my youngest daughter, Layla, she wasn't quite 13, that was about 9, 10 years ago now. And my eldest daughter read the chapter about herself. I asked if they wanted to read it before the manuscript was published. Anna read her chapter because she was the firstborn. Mimi read the very end chapter, which is what she does with all books. I don't understand that.
Straight to the end.
Yeah, Harry Potter, she did all of that. But Layla read the whole manuscript, all the details and everything, and she just said, "I'm very sorry that happened to you, Mummy." So
Yes.
I've always just been very honest about it, and yeah, they're aware of what can take place.
I suppose in about the 3 to 4 minutes we've left, I'd like to talk about how that's empowered you to take that story and what you've done with that to help people out there.
Yeah, it was really sharing it with an organisation called the Forgiveness Project. I was invited to go speak, and I never intended to be a speaker. I used to call myself an accidental speaker, but
Mm.
I've been incredibly lucky. It allowed me to stop working as a psychotherapist because I was being asked to speak more and more. And it's still a bit like that today. Every time I speak somewhere, someone else will then invite me to go somewhere else. So I'm very lucky. I appreciate that I'd never really gone looking for the work. So this really, in some way, I'm a purpose-driven speaker, I suppose. I'm not there to tell you how to make seven-figure salaries or how to speak better. I'm just really
No.
shatter the silence, I guess, and I guess like a sexual violence activist. But yeah, I'm really passionate about sharing my story, and I'm lucky I've spoken in amazing countries, amazing organizations, universities, conferences, online and in person. Yeah, and sadly, my story is just a story of many, many people, men and women. And now that I've found my voice, I was silent for about 35 years before I shared my story publicly.
Sure.
I'm not going to be quiet anymore. I can't be.
It's a real credit to you in the sense that so many people want to invite you to hear about the story, because it's a very, very difficult story to tell, and it's also a very, very difficult story to listen to. So it shows real strength in terms of how you've been able to put that narrative out there in different ways for different audiences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to traumatize the audience, and I try to add a little bit of humor if I can, so they see that I'm not traumatized in any way by speaking it. But yeah, I feel it's important to leave people thinking. Maybe what trauma they're holding on to, or maybe how they can be an ally to stop violence against women, because it's not a woman's issue, gender-based violence. It is a man's issue. So the men that come up to me and speak to me afterwards, what can I do? Well, you can call it out. If you get a sleazy joke on WhatsApp, you don't forward it on. You say to the person, what is this? Or if you see a woman being harassed, you go and stand up for her and you help her. There's many ways that men can be allies and support us, because it's really, male violence against women is a male issue at the end of the day.
Yes, it is. And I suppose certainly our audience will be keen to know, and it's not a spoiler alert, the two youths that were involved in that awful night, were they ever brought to justice?
They weren't, no, because they were sons of diplomats. So I think they lived in London for a couple of years. So by the time I eventually spoke about it, they would have left London, and I was still terrified that the repercussions, the threats that they made towards me. But it was only actually in writing my book, sorry to leave this at the end of the show, is that I realised that I had been raped 3 more times as well, because I had no understanding about consent. And these are the things that other people say to me, well, I didn't realise that partner I was married to, or this happened to me one night and there was no consent. So much is unreported, and that's we have a justice system that lets a lot of survivors, victims down as well. So it's not surprising that so many cases go unreported.
I suppose just to finish off, perhaps you would tell our audience the name of the book and where they can find out more about you, Madeleine.
Sure, my book is called Unbroken, because I do believe that none of us are broken beyond repair. And you can just go to my website and you'll find all my links for social media and podcasts, whatever, which is madelineblack.co.uk.
Fantastic. Well, what a great way to finish the show. A special thank you, Madeleine, for coming in and sharing a very, very personal and moving story. And I'm sure our audience would love to find out more about that. Thanks also to Sam on Sound. The podcast today show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. Thank you for your company. And please remember to join me, Alec Drew, again next week at the same time, 1 o'clock, right here on 103.2 Dublin City FM, for another edition of You and Your Business.